even though we missed the last two classes for various reasons, we're not that far behind. We were kind of running ahead, so that's good. And I think it's a matter of budgeting how many of the works out of your text versus the works in class we want to talk about. Today we're going to be finishing up talking about Lorenzo Lato. And I got a lot of pictures. I don't know if I'm going to get through them all. But one of the things that brings us into talking about portraiture, which is kind of coming up next. And the whole going back and picking up St. Jerome probably won't happen until we get to Veronese. So that might be a time to bring that reading in, right? And also because I'm so far behind in giving you peer review comments on the last two that I don't want to give you more to do at this point, plus you've got your first draft of the paper coming up, right? Is about a week and a half or 2 weeks away. I think that's better. When's the first draft paper? Right after Easter?
Oh, Friday next week.
Is it Friday next week? It's a week from today?
That's what I thought.
Yeah. Let me revisit the schedule and get back to you tomorrow morning as I'm getting back on this stuff, right? Because the thing is, if you guys do really good work on the first draft, the second draft is a walk in the park. But it's been my experience through the ample years I've been teaching these that the first drafts are often not. Well, they often need more research, not just more writing, but they need to. Because part of the working through the draft is saying, okay, where are some ideas that you've left kind of unsupported? And you need to look into this further, right? And that's part of the draft, is not just to say, okay, look, paragraph 3 is really out of place, and you need to pay more attention to punctuation. That's not the point. That's part of the point. That's not the entire point. The point is also to say, okay, you've got this, here you've mentioned, through this paper, right? Here you mentioned the shipwreck, but you don't give any kind of supporting evidence to discuss why it's there, or any supporting evidence of why we think that's where it means, right? So that part of why we're doing the draft as well is to talk about content, in addition to structure, format, rhetoric, and whatnot. Okay. So I do want you to have enough time to sort of, for me to be able to say, okay, look, you got to do some research too, and not just, it's due on Friday, I'll get you comments on Monday, and then you turn it in next Friday. That's not going to work, right? So, anyway, I'll be looking at the schedule more closely, right? Okay, so the other thing is since we're getting closer to talking more specifically about portraiture, we have a room of Titian portraits, right, that I would not mind having another field trip to go see. So does next Friday work as a field trip for people? Right? Fridays seem to be better than Tuesdays for people just because the week is over and all of that. There are no night classes on Fridays and whatnot. So let's pencil in a National Gallery field trip a week from today, where we will be looking at primarily at Titian portraits. Right? On Monday or Tuesday, what we'll be looking at, I think, will be other later works by Titian, because we've been focusing primarily on the earlier stuff. So we'll be looking at Margaret's picture. We'll be looking at the Venus and Adonis picture, some of those things. And then that'll prepare us for going down and then looking at the portraits firsthand. Okay. I think there's 6 of them down there, that one room. That'll be a nice little, that's a perfect amount for that one. So we'll be as close after 3 as we can. Some people have a 3:15. I can't remember who that is now. Sarah Plato was? Does anybody else have a class that ends at 3:15 on Friday? Right? Can you talk to them ahead and do a little bit of groundwork and try to skip out a bit early? Yeah. Great. So again, main house, right, as close to 3 o'clock as you can. Obviously maybe 5 or 10 minutes after we'll head on downtown. Okay. Right. I must read my notes more regularly as I wrote this 3 weeks ago. So we were looking at Lato, and we were looking at the allegory of virtue and vice. And if you remember, the painting was originally a sliding cover for this portrait, right? This portrait had, or still has, an unpainted portion of the panel at the top and the bottom that's kind of inordinately wide, top and bottom. And it seems to have had a frame with a hook that's slid in like doors to your deck, right? Screen doors to your deck or something, slid back and forth. And that's not uncommon in Renaissance art to have a cover, a painted cover. Sometimes they're hinged. It's a little more rare to have them slide like this, but it's not unheard of. Yeah, they covered that. It slid over the top of it. And we know this for a number of different reasons. We're absolutely sure that his name is on the back of that, right? It's written on the back of that by Lotto, along with his signature and the date he did it and how old he was when he painted it, right? And the date right down to the month and day. Right? So it's just no doubt whatsoever these things go together. And split over the top. And we have our second allegory by Lotto, the allegory of chastity, also functioned in the same way. It too was a sliding cover for a painting. And this one we're not 100% sure we know who she is, right? There's not that secondary evidence on the back of the panel. Physical evidence that goes with her, but she's the right size. She lives in Dijon in France, right? The portrait does, but this seems to have been probably, most people agree, is the cover for this work, right? And who she is a point of much more contention. No signature, no identification of the sitter. Some people think she might be the sister of the guy we just saw, Rossi, right? Because then we have these two Lotto allegories from roughly the same time for two members of the same family. You can see why there's a temptation. But it's absolutely no proof whatsoever. Over and above that, she'd be dead in 1506. And that doesn't mean it couldn't be her. It could be a posthumous portrait that Bernardo commissioned of his deceased sister, right? That said, it does seem quite portrait-like. Lotto's very good in both of these portraits of sort of not idealizing the sitter. They're not particularly, they're not beautified, right? Sort of works also. She's got a double chin, a kind of a dour expression. If we go back to him, right? He's also got warts, quite literally warts and all, right? And he's got this Donald Trump face thing, right? He's got the chipmunk eyes, where they're wider, like he's been wearing sunglasses in the sun or something. But every reproduction of this I've seen, he's had that Trumpian orange complexion that we see here. But you can see he's not trying to make him look particularly handsome. And that's kind of an interesting thing about his portraits is the degree to which they are unflattering, right? And in that particular respect. So it's very much detailed and portrait-like, and that suggests that she probably wasn't dead because it suggests that he was looking at her while he painted it, right? Now, it's again an allegory, just like we saw with the virtue of vice, but obviously what Lotto has done is to choose a more feminine allegory, right? A more feminized allegory, rather than the satyr that we saw that wasn't playing with this one was Cupid. This one we have two female characters in the allegory, so that is something to suggest that this one covers a female portrait rather than a male portrait. And so what we have is this woman in white. Obviously, that costume alone is part of the allegory of chastity, right? White as a symbol of purity. All you have to do is think about bridal gowns to drive this home. So here she is a symbol of purity. She's seated. It's a little hard to tell for sure, but right down in the lower left corner, right, just down in here, that's a pool of water. And you can see that some of the flowers that are being dropped onto her lap are on the ground next to her and actually floating in the water as well. So there's this sort of parallelism between that pool of clear water and her lap, right? And that adds to the idea of chastity, pure, clear, clean, right? And the fact that the flowers fall in both places is meant for you as a viewer to make that parallel between these two things. And up above, we see this Puto dropping the flowers. Now, the idea of a rain of objects from heaven on a reclining figure, I don't have any slides to back this up, brings up a couple of myths that people at first glance often mistake this for. One of the loves of Jupiter, God who had a taste for female human flesh, not canon, right, but sexual. And male, too. But regardless, he appeared to Danae, D-A-N-A-E, Danae, in the form of a shower of gold. And that's always depicted with her reclining on the crown. You see the shower of gold falling into her lap, whereas then anything but chastity, right, is the exact opposite because it's seduction. And this seems to be modeled after that, but you're never meant to think of it that way, right? In fact, I guess maybe the parallel would be to think of it as being a undeniably chastity, right? So she's the anti-denia. Before we look at the putti up above, you'll notice that the tree that she's leaning on is again a stump with a single branch that grows, and we saw that in the other allegory as well. And in fact, if you think about the general arrangement with a figure in the center, a tree stump with a single branch growing, large groves on either side, left and right groupings of figures, then you can see why is the temptation to see these things go side by side, right? To come from the same context. But the tree she's leaning against is a laurel tree. Now the laurel has a lot of symbolism, and we need to be careful when we are decoding symbols, because context means everything. And so while a laurel can be seen as a symbol of victory, a laurel can be seen as a symbol of poetry, right? The laurel is also sometimes seen as a symbol of chastity. And in this particular case, even though it has those other meanings that you could bring into it, I believe Lotto's intention is almost exclusively with building on the chastity metaphor, right? So in this case, the laurel tree doesn't mean the things that we might associate with in a different kind of painting. We'll see some other ones where we see laurels meaning something altogether different, right? But here it's definitely chastity. There's a little Puto up above, the cloud behind him, right? But he's almost on a cloud of flowers and sprinkling them down on her. I love the way in which the flowers themselves seem to be providing a source of light. And we've seen this in Venetian pictures a lot, where nature itself is artificially illuminated, right, by something that's meant to be, that moment where the physical and the metaphysical worlds come together, and you get these artificial sorts of light that are at odds with the natural source of light. So if we think about this, the sun is back over here somewhere, right? And it's coming across this way, illuminating those rocks in the background, but that's not the source of light that's lighting up our Puto. So he's giving, in his great ability, Lotto, in the same way as Titian and Giorgione, the ability to render atmosphere and light. They're exploiting that, and in this case, the undersides of those clouds are lit from the bottom from that light, but the Puto, the trees are in the way. It couldn't have happened. So I think he's aware of that mastery and is using it to enhance the meaning of these things, right? Whereas with the virtue and vice allegory, we saw the two sides of the composition meaning different things, right? The right-hand side was debauchery, and the left-hand side was virtue, right? Here, the right-hand side is still debauchery, which is stage left, right? When I'm looking at you, my left-hand side is the bad side, okay? And so he's bad. And look, it's very cute. He's doing this frat boy drinking game, right? You ever see a Boda bag? When I was a kid, everybody had Boda bags. There was this leather satchel that they got, the gauchos in Argentina used them, and had a little nipple, and you squeeze it, and it would shoot a line of whatever you were drinking, and the trick was to try to get as far away from your mouth as you could and not get all over your face, right? And when I had one, I was a kid, I just it was soda pop, right? But frat boys would do it at parties, figure out ways to get drunk quicker. Well, he's kind of doing the same thing, right? He's got his little thing of wine, and he's at first I thought he was looking like it's good, right? But no, he's actually got his tongue out. It's really disgusting, right? And he's pouring it onto that forked fader tongue that he has sticking out of his mouth. So it certainly is intended to be debauchery, right? What's interesting, compositionally, you notice how his pose is really similar to hers. So you're supposed to go, good, bad, right? Leaning on one elbow, right, feet out to the right. That it's not a direct quote because that'd be a little heavy-handed, but it's close enough to make you, the viewer, understand that there's our parent, are these two. And so the question is then, what do we do with the third figure, the woman Sefer, who you see peeking out kind of mischievously from the forest at her husband across the way? I've never seen anybody offer a different way of interpreting her other than, she completes his allegory, if you will. That these are the debauched people who live closer to nature, very uncivilized, wild, etc. Right? And they, as a pair, are meant as an antithesis to chastity. Right? But I still would like to see him get into her a bit more deeply and find out more about her. I don't know. Our speaker today said, I don't know what's going on, but I'm inspired to think about it. And so I kind of feel the same way about her. Right? Now, these allegories that we've been looking at with these two Lotto pieces, and we sort of led into that, right, with those Giorgione-esque pieces that were also allegories, right? We saw the hourglass and the figure that may be Apollo or Orpheus. Right? We saw the other image of Orpheus, and we saw that other image of Cupid and Venus, right? So we've been looking at these allegorical landscapes. Now, the last two classes that we met, Lotto did more than just that. He's really sort of our third major painter from the early part of the 16th century. He's one of the people I always skipped. Whenever I don't know why, just because I didn't have time to look at him. And the more I look at him, the more I really kind of like him. I think he's got a lot to offer. These sort of this undiscovered charms of Lorenzo Lotto. Well, remember he was born and trained in Venice, and in 1513 he moves outside. He moved already outside of Venice, right, to Treviso, and in 1513 he moves to a new town, Bergamo, where he spends the majority of the rest of his career. All of these towns on the mainland are part of the Venetian Republic, so he's still Venetian, but he's not in the city. And we sort of mentioned the fact that maybe a city with Titian and Giorgione at the same time might have been a little crowded, and Bellini was still alive. You got to be a pretty good painter to compete in that kind of environment, right? So he's moving to other parts of the Venetian Republic to continue his career. So here's the Nativity, right? Mary and Joseph taking a moment to ponder the birth of the Savior. Saint Bridget of Sweden had a vision that she wrote about, and it was published widely, distributed everywhere, that the Virgin Mary, on giving birth to Christ, took a moment to ponder what she had done and look down at Christ and actually back off and worship him as he laid on the ground. We see this has become a prominent theme in painting already in the 15th century. Bridget of Sweden is around 1400. And according to Bridget of Sweden, she also, on pondering it and understanding the spiritual truth of the matter, she felt faint because she realized the fate of her son. And as any mother, realizing that her son is going to grow up and be tortured to death in his early 30s would be a horrifying act. And so Bridget, in her vision, not only sees the Virgin Mary take a moment to worship Christ after he's been born, ponder his fate, but then fall back and faint away. We don't see that part of it here, right? But that often accounts for why we often see a column at the nativity scene. So, because Bridget says when she leaned back, she found the ruins of an old column that gave her support, right? That was her vision. So, anyway, I think the idea of the Virgin and Joseph at the nativity, no shepherds here yet, right? This is not an adoration of the shepherds, it's a simple nativity, and they're not. Sometimes in the nativity, Joseph's just kind of sitting off to the side doing nothing, but they're actively engaged with worshiping Christ. And I think we'd make a nice comparison, I don't remember if I brought it in, but with the Giorgione nativity, right? Because they're doing very much the same thing there as the shepherds arrive. And Lotto certainly knows Giorgione's work, so there's altogether likely that he's channeling some ideas there. Our shepherds are here, but they're still stuck in the background, right? So there's a single shepherd back there with his flock. I never noticed that the entire flock is inside Joseph's halo, right? Sort of like he's got them penned up. inside his halo. And I'm still trying to figure out what that is next to the shepherd there laying between the trees. Right? It almost looks like armor, doesn't it? Or something like that. But it shouldn't be, because he's a shepherd, not a soldier, by any means. Right? But there's something there, and I can't figure out exactly what that is. So this is a harbinger of things to come. This is the next step in the story, alluding to that the shepherds are going to see the light, follow it, and come do what the Holy Family is doing. And lo and behold, look how smart I am. 2 weeks ago when I put this together, I did in fact bring that in. So my brand new observation about how similar they are to Giorgione is in fact a very old observation of how similar they are to Giorgione, and you see it right here, right, where Joseph is more engaged in the act. I mentioned when we were downtown that Giorgione's Joseph, yes, cell phones, I know, but he looked almost like he's looking at his hands than he is Jesus, it looks like, I still get the sense that he's trying to figure out how to do what the Virgin's doing. Like somehow she's locked her thumbs together in a particular way that he needs to figure out, And he's learning yet how to be Saint Joseph, right? But he hasn't figured that out yet. But with Lotto, he's much more deeply engaged. And Joseph is, like I said, this character wherein we see his fortunes rise and fall all the time. So in some pictures, he's very, very honorable, right, noble. And in some pictures, he's kind of a goofy figure off to the side. Right? So when we look at the Carpaccio, where it looks like he's walking off the path, and I can put you in other ones where he seems to be tripping around and whatnot, his pants are falling down and things like that. I kid you not. His knickers are falling down. But in this case, he's definitely a noble figure. He's really a very prominent and important part of the Holy Family, and has more to do than just lead the donkey to Egypt, right? So we see, I think, with a lot of these pictures that Joseph is this really strong figure, right, in these. And you'll notice that, like the other Giorgione that we looked at, he's still got his walking stick there with the T-top, right, in Lotto's work at least. And so, again, that alludes to the fact that he will be helping them get to Egypt eventually, right? But at this point in his career, he's simply joining the Virgin Mary in giving honor to the birth of the Savior. Right, and there's the Carpaccio we talked about, in case you can remember. Do you notice anything odd about this nativity? Anything really weird about it? No, that's just from the frame. That's just the shadow cast by the frame. They're not in the stable? What's that in the upper left corner? What the heck? There's a crucifix, right? Why would they have a crucifix at the moment that Jesus is dead? Or born, I mean, right? The crucifix is a memorial of the death of Christ, and this is the moment when he's born. So this is a very anachronistic element within this picture, right? And again, I think it adds to what I started talking about with the vision of St. Bridget of Sweden, where that moment of Christ's birth, and part of her taking this moment to ponder the momentousness of this event, is also to reflect on the fact and to understand the fact of why he was born. Memento mori are usually for us, like a skull that reminds us that we're going to die. And in this case, I don't think the crucifix really goes there. I think it's more, this is not the only picture where we see the anachronistic crucifix at the moment of the birth of Christ. And I could point to a half dozen others, right, where this comes up. And it is this thing we sort of take it for granted. We see crucifixes everywhere that, they've got a crucifix because they're religious, right? They're Catholics, good Catholics. But in fact, it does actually make no sense here to have it here. And so it comes down to the fact that Christ is here basically for that purpose. Now, it ties into something else, which is really kind of fascinating, which is that theologians often mention that Christ was the bait in a trap for Satan. That once Christ became fully human, theologically, right, that's why we always see him naked. We can see his baby joke, right? The reason for that is because he has to be fully human. Otherwise, the sacrifice on the cross, it means nothing, right? In other words, if Christ is still a deity, then the moment that he dies is no big deal, because right? He's not really, he's not human. And only humans can truly die. So Christ has to be fully human. And theologians, 13th century, maybe a little earlier, began to talk about this in metaphoric terms, that Jesus becoming human was bait in a trap for Satan, who says, oh, the Son of God is fully human, I can kill him. And like any bait in a trap, when you go for the bait, you trap yourself, right? So, it's a fox trap, right? The cage closes. Mouse trap, the springs, right? And so Christ was the bait in the trap. And by killing him, Satan filling the heart of Judas to betray him, and the hearts of, and actually bringing about his death, Satan in fact brings about his own downfall, right? And that led some people to look at the object in the lower right corner and think maybe that's about that mousetrap metaphor, right? Christ is the bait in the trap for Satan. And could that be some sort of trap? Because there's that, it's hard to say what that is down there. What is that thing in the lower right corner? And you'll notice compositionally, right, across that diagonal, you've got the crucifix up here, and you've got that thing down there, right? And sort of Christ is between them, not exactly, right? But between those two corners, what is that thing? Interestingly, he signs on it. It's got Lotto's signature on it, right? L. Lotto 1522, right? And people said maybe it's a rudimentary part of a mousetrap. You find that in other pictures where Joseph is preparing a mousetrap, right? For Satan, playing a role in all of that. And that sort of sat around as the way of interpreting this thing for a long time. And then somebody said that somebody who knew about it said it's a piece of unfinished carpentry, right? So that is part of Joseph's role, right? Joseph is such an important figure in this composition. So in the lower right corner, we have this piece of unfinished carpentry. And somebody went a step further and said that particular kind of carpentry is a piece of carpentry for joining two pieces of wood at right angles to each other. Crucifix, right? So Joseph's carpentry is there as a way of helping prepare the salvation of man. If you can look at the crucifix and say, okay, Joseph helped prepare the death of Christ. No, Joseph helped prepare the salvation of man. Right? And that ends up emphasizing, again, the importance of him as a character. In so many different miniature pictures, but in this one in particular, it's as strong as it is in the right? Now we're going to look at a few other Lottos, and I always tell people when they give presentations, don't show something just because you can. Right? You should always have a reason for why you include things in your presentations that should add to your talk in some way. I'm going to show you something just because I can. One of my favorite pictures in all of New York City is this Lotto. Just look at it. It's Cupid peeing through a laurel wreath on his mom. Right? And the first time I saw this, I said, what? What is going on here? Right? And just in case you thought that Lotto was just, all, this holy picture, there's Venus. It's just this weird allegory of which there's a time, we look at other allegories, this is even stranger. Conch shell tied up with a ribbon over her head that seems to come down and drape onto her diadem. Cupid over there on the left taking perfect aim through that laurel crown that's got an incense burner, right, steaming beneath it. And her lap covered in flowers. Again, we've seen that on the snake in the lower right corner. This is the sort of thing where it's obviously meant to both entertain and intrigue you, right? The standard explanation, if you really want to know, right, is that there are there's a variety of poetry that was very popular in Venice that goes back to ancient Rome. That is a poem that's composed to celebrate a marriage, specifically a gift poem for an event. Right? The $10 word is an epithalamian poem. And the subject matter of these poems is often Cupid trying to wake up Venus so that she can go and make the wedding special. And give her blessings at the wedding. That's one way to wake up your mom, right? Not for everybody. And some people suggest that that's the face of the woman that this was given to on Venus. It's big, too. It's not a whole lot smaller than that photograph on the screen, right? So it's this wacky thing. I remember the first time I saw it, I was just like, had some grad students from Marymount in the humanities program, and they said, what do you do with Icarus? I have no idea. So anyway, I'm showing you something just because I can, right? You shouldn't come out of a class on Lotto and not see that picture, right? In fact, one of the people I interviewed this week said, I was talking about Lotto this week. She goes, "Oh, that great picture in New York with the king Cupid." I said, "Oh yeah, yeah, that's a nice slideshow." Oh, there we are. Going back to the works, more hygienic works from the National Gallery by Lotto, we've got quite a few. This wonderful St. Catherine, and just like that, Venus might well have been a portrait in the guise of Venus. Some people suggest that this might be a portrait of a young lady in the guise of St. Catherine. And that was a fairly common trope. We're going to be talking a little bit about portraits today. But having yourself cast in the guise of a particular saint or a figure from history was not extraordinary. That was not uncommon. And she does kind of look portrait-like. So here's St. Catherine of Alexandria. And I'll presume that you don't know the legend of St. Catherine and go through it a little bit here. So bear with me if you do know it, or tune out. Right? She was a scholar. She was the daughter of a Roman governor in Alexandria. And she was a child prodigy scholar. Right? This all took place around 300 AD under Maxentius, just before Constantine legalizes Christianity, which is one of the worst time for persecutions of Christians in the history of the Roman Empire. Right? So she's a child prodigy scholar, the daughter of a Roman governor, and also, because she's such a good scholar, she has no choice but to figure out the best way, which is Christianity. Right? So she's a young child scholar Christian, right, to a pagan Roman governor. Under Maxentius wants to humiliate her because she's young and brilliant and Christian. He wants to humiliate her, so he makes her sit down and debate the 50 best philosophers in his court. And she wins, hands down. Women's power, right? She's able to debate down 50 male scholars, and this pisses them all off very much. In fact, some of the pagan philosophers that he calls upon the debater, she gets them to convert, right? So she's just that good, right? So Max says she's not going to give up. Fine, I'll take the next step. Let's torture her then, right? Fine, I can't humiliate her now, I'm just going to hurt her, right? So he has her imprisoned, has her tortured, and part of her torture, the most famous part, is that she's tied to a wheel with spikes on it. And her body has been stretched on a spiked wheel. Right? So you can see her hand is leaning on a broken wheel. And in fact, her crown is kind of like a spiked wheel as well, right? And what happens while she's being strapped is, of course, she feels no pain. So she lays there and, are you guys done yet? I got somewhere to go tonight, right? Is that all you got? And God intervenes, the wheel shatters. And all of the torturers are killed by the spiked wheel. And she walks away free, even unscarred. So Catherine's wheel, which you see over here, is always broken. That's her symbol, because that's God's faithfulness to her during that part of the torture. So of course, she now humiliated Maxentius twice, right? She's outdebated his philosophers. She survived the imprisonment of the spiked wheel. So what does he do? Cuts off her head, right? That's always a pretty good way to just cut to the quick, right? And that's how she's eventually killed. It's cut to the head. Right? So that all is an attempt to silence her. Now you'll notice in this detail that in addition to the wheel there, we see a ring on her wedding finger. Right? Catherine had a vision, a dream, where she was married to Christ, where Christ presented her a ring in the dream and put her on her finger. And when she woke up, the ring was there, miraculously. When she dreamt about it, was on her hand. And so, sometimes with St. Catherine, we see the theme, the pictorial theme of the mystic marriage of St. Catherine, right, where she envisions Christ putting a ring on his finger, and then eventually wakes up with said ring as a real thing, not just an element of the dream. So when we talk about the iconography of St. Catherine, the idea of being a bride is part of that iconography. The idea of being a tortured victim on the wheel is part of that iconography. These are the symbols that identify her. So not only her ring, but her diadem up above with the pearls that fade through it is very much like a wedding crown. Like we saw on the urinated Venus, right, had a very similar kind of diadem on. So her pearl earrings, her pearls in her hair, the jewels, and the crown are all meant as symbols of that part of her legend, well known to everyone. And then the palm frond is for her martyrdom, right, as a martyr saint. Right? So, what's interesting about Lotto at exactly this time is there's quite a few pictures of St. Catherine by Lotto, and I haven't seen anybody investigate this. I was curious as to whether or not in Bergamo, if there was a particular cult around St. Catherine that would inspire many different patrons to want a work of art with St. Catherine. So I looked it up, right? I looked at St. Catherine in Bergamo. I went back to some of my, more learned travel guides to find out if they had a relic of her there or something along those lines. There is a parish dedicated to St. Catherine, but I don't know what it dates from, right? And that's not a big deal. There's probably a parish dedicated to St. Catherine in almost every Italian town. So I couldn't find it out, but that would be something that one could research. What is the significance of St. Catherine to not only the Lotto, but primarily the Lotto's patrons living in the town of Bergamo, right? So, there we see the Mystic Mary. So there's St. Catherine on the ground. You'll notice she has a different clothing, but she's got the crown on her head, and Christ is now slipping the ring on her finger. Her vision included the Virgin Mary, right, who held Christ, the infant Christ as he did this. I guess that makes it less weird, doesn't it? Because it's the baby Christ that does it, not the adult Christ. So there's no sort of other weirdness to the marriage, right? It's a spiritual union. And here we see behind the Virgin Mary, that's not Joseph, but that's the person who paid for the picture on the left, right? But certainly every bit as interested in Niccolo Bonghi, every bit as interested in St. Catherine as a focus for his private prayers, as whomever this was hinted for, right? And there's my close-up of this, so you can see Christ putting the ring on her finger. And you'll notice that the crown and the jewels and the are very similar to what we have over here, even if the face is significantly different, right? Pointing your nose, eyes further apart, blah, 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 blah. It's not. So this is not, he doesn't have a given conception of St. Catherine, although there is a conception of female physiognomy. So some elements of this St. Catherine are repeated in other images of St. Catherine, right? And then I brought this in as well. As I actually had it earlier when I was talking about the jewels as another reference to the mystic church of St. Catherine. Some scholars have looked into other elements of this picture. Come on, respond. Help me out here. There we go. And I've noticed that the brocade on that beautiful, it's just gorgeous, the color combos. I mean, Venetian painters have been such good colorists, you know? Everywhere we look, we find these really terrific combinations of colors, of triads or quatrains of color. And you'll notice that that blue and red that you see here, you see on the figure on the far left. There, where St. Catherine appears the second time. And so this is St. Catherine here as well, right? There's a crown, there's her martyr's front, and you can see she has the same green wrap and a similarly colored robe. Not the same robe, but similar, right? But what is the same in both of these is the brocade, right? The pattern on the brocade behind her is the pattern on the brocade on the cloth, not the carpet, but the cloth that's draped over the altar. So we think that this is probably a studio prop that he's rendered fairly exactly in both of them. But it is kind of fascinating to think that he's got these things. And I love that John the Baptist strangling that little lamb down below, right? But that's the exact same pattern in both of them, and suggests that it's something that he had. This gives us the opportunity to compare our St. Catherine's. We've got the same conception of the crown, the jewels, the martyr's palm, and the same sort of billowy robe. But in this case, her bodice is blue, right? And maybe similarly designed, not exactly, but similarly designed. But certain differences, right? Those tongue-like things that come up around her neck, right? In the painting on the right are just similar. But I began to be interested in whether or not Lotto had what was he doing when I started to see these different brocades. I started looking at sort of across the board at Lotto pictures. There was a big Lotto exhibition at the National Gallery a few years back, and so I had the catalog. I was leafing through sort of all the Lotto paintings I could find. And one of the things I noticed was that in addition to there being lots of St. Catherine's, and I think that's her on the right again, but that costume reappears, right? So here the Virgin Mary is wearing the same costume as St. Catherine's there. And I don't need to point this out. Look at the sleeves. Look at how they gather around the arms. Look at how it billows, especially around the forearm, right? But that is very much, and I can't vouch for the color right, on this because I've not seen this. It's an internet download, right? But certainly these show up, and so we have St. Catherine on the far right there. In this case, she's been replaced by the patron who paid for it, but there's that same robe over again. So what's interesting about these pictures when you see enough of them is you realize the degree to which our painters are using studio props or maybe sketches, right? You know, Sarah has you taking sketches from one set of sessions and reusing them in a new context, right? And our Renaissance artists did exactly the same thing. They would have, drawings that provided them the basis, because you can't set up fabric study every time you want to do fabric. So you would keep sketchbooks full of these patterns that you could use and reuse as you went through. And you can even see that the folds are similar in a number of places with the one in the center, right? Now, with this idea of a portrait in the guise of brings the possibility for that with St. Catherine, brings us to Sebastiano del Piombo, who was trained in Venice, again, at the time of Giorgione's mission. Also, like Lotto, left Venice. And this is from his Venetian period. And we saw her before, very briefly. She came flying by 2 weeks ago when we saw this. But this one certainly seems like a portrait in the guise of, I think it was like Joan Riggins. She always reminds me of Joan Riggins. But looking out over our shoulder with this amazing blue robe on. It's certainly intended as one of the wise virgins, but probably a portrait in that particular guise. The wise virgins is one of Christ's parables that he tells in the book of St. Matthew. Matthew 25, if you want to drag your Bible out. 10 bridesmaids are preparing for the arrival of the groom. 5 of them prepare for that arrival, or well prepared for it, by having lamps filled with oil, so that when the groom arrives in the middle of the night, they can light their lamps and greet him. The other 5 only have the lamps and don't have any oil. Right? The bridegroom in the parable arrives around midnight. Only the wise virgins are ready to greet him. And so when Christ talks about this, it says, the wise and foolish virgins are all of us. Male and female, doesn't matter. And the wise virgins are the ones that are prepared to meet their Savior when he arrives unexpectedly on his return. And the foolish virgins are the ones that aren't ready, haven't got their act together, and when he comes, they're going to be left in the lurch. Right? So it's an idea of the second coming of Christ is what this is really all about. Right? So, what's interesting about Piombo's work is that there's nothing in it that might tell us whether or not that lamp has oil in it or not. But it would be stupid for anybody to have them depicted in the guise of a foolish virgin. And why would anybody, even if it weren't a portrait, why would you want a picture of the foolish virgin? It makes more sense to have the wise virgin, right? So we presume because she has a lamp. even if we can't see the oil, we presume that it is the well-prepared plan of a wise virgin. Right? Now, again, with this idea of our artists using studio props, the dress that this woman wears is really similar to this one, also by Sebastiano. Some people think it's Salome with the head of John the Baptist. She looks like a portrait. That would be crazy. Who would want to have their portrait painted? It's a chaste society, so we're not talking about goth rockers out there who want to associate themselves with something evil, right? Or symbolist poets or something like that who might, like Gauguin, who might say, hey, it's really cool to be Satan, right? Well, in 1630 Venice, that just doesn't, they're not buying pictures. That survived, right? So the more likely thing is that she's Judas with the head of Holofernes, because she's a heroine, right? Defeater of evil. But certainly, and again, looks very much like a portrait in the guise of, even from talk about whether or not this is the same person in both pictures. Yeah, the hair color is so similar. The eye color is similar as well, you know? And if you take into account that you're looking up from underneath the chin on the one on the right, which would make the jowls look heavier or wider. So the lower jaw of our picture is a bit more boxy, right? Like that. Whereas this one's in London on the left. They're more sort of rounded and baby fat, right? Cheeks. But yeah, if you take into account the different point of view, then definitely one could argue that it's very much the same person, right? This is all complicated, however, by the fact that Judith, when we see the images of Judith and Holofernes, she often has the head, but she's put in a bag. There is no iconographic tradition for Salome, for Judith, to walk around with the head of Holofernes on a plate. It just doesn't, there's nothing to compare it to. If this is Judith with the head of Holofernes, it's the only one where we see it with his head on a plate. And that is always a red flag for us as we interpret works of art. If we've got the only example of something, then we should say, well, maybe that's not the right answer then, right? So, there we are with that. It raises more questions than it answers, but, with each of these, I think we can talk about them as images of virtuous women doing their duty, if in fact we're reading this properly as Judith, right? I would like to know further. I know that in other countries we can find pictures that are giving examples of improper behavior, negative examples of people behaving badly that are meant to alert you on how not to behave. But they tend not to be religious pictures. They tend to be genre scenes, temptresses, taking money from old men who think that the lovely young thing is interested in them when it actually just wants the money, right? So they tend not to use religion for that message. So these are, like I said, these are full of interesting problems. You've got to grad school. Margaret, you're in art history. Go up to grad school, and you figure it out, right? Go up to Maryland, where some of the National Gallery curators teach and say, I want to work on this. I want to find out what's going on with this thing, right? And tell them I told you to, right? Now these all bring us back to Titian, because remember that with this group now, Sebastiano's in Venice, studying with the people in Venice at the same time, and brings us now back to Titian's work. And this is also in London, the man with the blue sleeve knockout portrait, right, leaning on that shelf. And you can have to point out all the similarities between these two. Compositionally, she is him with the window, right, and a little bit less of the balustrade on which she leans, right? And it's not leaning quite so heavily on it. But certainly, I think Sebastiano knows the Titian. I think it's not the other way around. Right? And again, the interest in costuming and that amazing blue that she's wearing here and in our pictures and in Titian's, that's sweetest and knockout, right, in the Titian. He signed it on the balustrade where Sebastiano dated it on the balustrade. So the TV down below in Titian, see those down there? As it's carved, Tiziano Bicellio, right? His last name is Bicellio. And so that is his signature down there, right? But these portrait texts that we're seeing here around 1500, whether it's with our woman that we just saw a second ago, right, her, this Judith Salome picture on the left, Titian's picture, these are all very much of the type of portrait that we see often in Venice in the first decade or so of the 16th century. And so for the longest time, it's hung in the National Gallery. When I arrived here in 2006, this was labeled Titian. And prior to that, it had been labeled Giorgione. And these days, they're calling it Cariani. And long story, right? There's nothing to attribute it. There's no signature. But you can see the similarity in this Venetian portrait type with the view outside the window, the stone balustrade that originally went all the way across. And then he raised, whoever painted it, raised it a notch on the far right. So what you're seeing here, oops, sorry about that. What you're seeing there is the ghost of the original painting that has come through the paint as it's gone transparent and changed up the composition a little bit. Leaning his hand on a book, and down below inscribed VVO instead of TV, right? Now, VVO, some people even said Bicellio, that might have something to do with that. But now we're pretty sure the VVO means something altogether different. Vivus Vivos. I think I might have that coming up, right? It appears on another Titian portrait, VV, or Giorgione portrait in Berlin, VV down below. And VV or VVO, Vivus Vivo, the living made this for those who are alive. That's what Vivus in Latin means. Just an economical language, right? Vivus Vivo means the living made it for one who is alive. So, living artist made this for someone who's still there, right, still around. And so, Vivus Vivo or Vivus Vivo, in either of these, relate to that inscription, right? The guy on the right, mean-looking fella, Look at that. Look at the way he's clenching. There's a handkerchief in his hand. He's dangerously holding that, isn't he? In ancient Roman portraiture, what did we see? It did. It meant something. And I have to remember, because a year ago I gave that lecture. Good for you to remember that. You're right. But there was an Egyptian art that we saw that a figure that held a cloth in house. And that helped, exactly right. So sometimes with Egyptian pharaoh sculptures, right? So you see the pharaoh, he's sitting there with, right, so he's sitting for a while, like, and one hand usually this hand is ball tip, and this one is flat, right? And you see it all the time in pharaoh sculpture. And some people suggest that it means justice and forgiveness. Yeah. Sir rule. But this hand, if you look at it enough, I'll have a little nub here, and sometimes on the side of the leg, you can see there's a pair of cloth, like a ribbon that's folded in half in some sense. And that is, as Margaret rightly remembers, is a symbol for health. So that's really good, right? I never read that about the picture, but, maybe for the living, by one who's alive, right? And the what? And healthy, exactly right. What's even more fascinating about it is that the concept of activity. This question is so, and the look on his face, in fact, he's not to be desperate, right? Well, originally, and maybe you can see some of the ghosts in there, he was holding the ghost of the soul, or a dagger, we don't know which, right? But there was up the top and up the bottom of the book, and the hanging, or an afterthought, right? Those were added at the very end.
punchable hole. Because if you zoom out this with a dagger or a sword, then that look, all of a sudden it makes a whole lot more sense, doesn't it? And then the changes from that into something that's more gentle, kind, humane, and learning is what obviously he must have wanted. Right? So, but you can see there's a lot of changes, right? And there's a lot of the focus, you see where the counter goes under the book, you can see there's no space. And again, it's just that's the key when you're looking at pictures, right? It isn't the book is an afterthought. The question is when. Right? And when I was doing some reading on Giorgione, during that time of the meeting, I got to go through the consortium on Giorgione. And one of the things I mentioned is that the angel in the Annunciation, or the shepherd picture in the Annunciation, that I mentioned is an afterthought. And I said, I don't know what it means, and it's mentioned in Giorgione. I was wrong, it's not Giorgione. Because it's painted over the crack cavity. So the paint is old enough that it's not what's called crack of the mirror, right? That's that fine interdimensional crack that you see on the screen. And the angel is over the top of that. So it is aged enough to get the crack out, which has Giorgio died ago, right? Giorgio died in his 30s, so it's not because the painting was not aged enough to have that crack out before he died. Right? This is like one of the great things about art history. For me, lots of great things. One of the things I really like about art history is the degree to which it makes you get into everything else. Right? Literature, philosophy, religion. Right? I don't often lecture on like a true believer, and I know these parts of the religious person. I don't put any great, stage or talk to them as an individual, but I know that they were important to the people who know them. You have to get into that. And if you're antithetical to that, then you got to choose a different group to study. Because you can't have that. But most recently, especially in the last 35 years or so, science has become even stronger, and it's always been part of it. What we can do now with macro photography, getting as close as we possibly can, infrared, X-ray, other lights that we can shine onto the scope very easily, places where previous restorers have filled things in. And these are all crucial for us because I'm going to look at me now. I look at, I got icons. But, if you're going to interpret something, you got to know why it was put there. So with that angel in the owl kind of Annunciation, the national hour shepherds, you've got to know what that angel is before you see it. Right? And if you were going to interpret that look on the side, and we found out that both eyes were filled in by the restorers in the 18th century, then that would alter everything you had to say about it. Right? This is why for every one of you, I'm very adamant, go get the National Gallery catalog, find out what they have to tell you about the physical state of the painting. Right? The Laro picture we started off tonight with, right? The proof that it belongs to Bernardo da Rossi is on the back of the picture. Written on the back of the picture. Right? So if you're here or further west in Boise, Idaho, and you don't have the object to look at, you don't really know that. We're very lucky. There's other stuff. But one of the things I like about our history is you've got to get into the other stuff. Right? And bring it all comes to bear. And I think, listening to artists talk about their work these last couple of weeks, one of the things I've noticed as well is the degree to which the good work that people do has to come with the fact, is due to the fact that they allow what happens in their life to have a bearing on their work. Right? That's seamless. That anything that happens to me comes out here. And that should be true for, I don't care what your major is. That should be true in your historical studies. That should be true in your fashion studies. Right? That should be true everywhere. That what we experience feeds into the things that we creatively produce. Whether that's academic creativity or the kind of artistic creativity,
Cariani. Now, why Cariani? Well, it was most recent, and the technical study suggested quite strongly that it was neither tissue nor Giorgione. And the technical study came through X-rays and infrared. Infrared is often more accurate than X-ray because certain pigment artists use can block X-ray very easily, especially white. Red light, right? Blocks X-rays. And so infrared, however, it's a digital technology where you shine an infrared light on the painting. It works particularly good with paintings on panels. And then you train a digital camera to only respond to that wavelength of infrared light, which means that as it looks at the picture, it will be a ghost of the surface, but it will see the light as it goes through the paint, bounces off infrared light that goes through the paint, bounces off the panel underneath, and comes back through, and is then blocked by the original drawing that the painter did. And that means a connoisseurship level, right? The guys that can say, that's a Giorgione because it looks like a Giorgione, I can prove it based on how it looks. There's another level of connoisseurship, which is looking at the drawings they did on the panels underneath. So we look at the established Giorgione group, and we can find that there's a way that he drew, and that is inconsistent with that. Ditto for tissue, inconsistent, right? So if they had anything to do with it, then it's really a wacky sort of painting, right? Now, is it consistent with Cariani? I've not read that it is, but the curator of 16th century Italian, David Allen Brown, has compared the face of this guy to the face, especially the two on the left, and said this looks close enough to me to suggest that since it's not Titian, not Giorgione based on technical studies, as good as anything Cariani, right? And that's now how the catalog is online. We'll come back to this one because it's a good picture. Right, no chance, but I think we'll wrap up today with one more portrait, which is from the Giorgione circle. This one is very interesting as well because that underdrawing we've been talking about, right, the underdrawing, the drawing beneath the surface of the paint, is Giorgione. Yeah, no doubt about it. Apparently, that with this one, with the Giovanni Borgherini is Tudor on the left. No doubt about it that the underdrawing of this one is Giorgione just as much as the underdrawing of the Venetian Gelamo on the right is not, right? It's utterly consistent. But there are some problems with the surface that is very much unlike the way in which he treats that paint. And it might have to do as much as anything with an abrasion of the final surface, right? So that's why it remains Giorgione or Circle Up. He had some hand in it. But it could well be that he started it off and handed it over to a shop assistant to wrap it up. Maybe even did some things like the armillary just here in the middle, or some of the things the kid's holding down below. You'll notice he's got stuff in his hand as well, very similar to our Venetian gentleman. It's not, I thought it was a sword at first. It's not. And we'll talk about that in just a second, right? But certainly the things that they clutch remain integral to understanding who they are. So we've got a young man and his tutor on the right. And the tutor is holding this armillary sphere. That's the thing for measuring the heavens, right? That's the thing for what all those bands around that orb do is measure how stars move in the sky, right? So for tracking the planets as they move. And this is before Galileo, before they realized that planetary motions had to do with the Earth moving, not just the planets moving, right? Well, they do with the planets, but with the Earth moving, and it's not the stars that are moving inside. So that's why they move around the outside like that. Right? So it's called an armillary sphere. In addition to the underdrawing, there is a undeniable Giorgione, where you can see a very similar arrangement with a young. This is an allegory for youth, maturity, and old age, the three ages of man. But you can see that he's arranged it as a young man with his tutor and an older scholar looking on, right? But if we look at the tutor on the right and we look at the gesture and the teaching, you can see why we want to put it in the Giorgione camp somewhere. And the technical studies confirm that the underdrawing is similar. So this falls into a type, right, of picture of tutors and their charge, tutors and their pupils, of young men being taught to learn. And you can see that if you look at the surface of the two, how much less resolved the faces are in our picture, which complicates identifying for certain how much Giorgione had a hand in finishing the picture. We certainly know he started it, right? Other people point to things I'm a little bit less reluctant to buy into, like the colors are too warm and things like that. It's like, really? I mean, but I'll leave them. That's not my kind of art history. Okay? So there's even an attempt to identify the tutor. We know who Borgherini is because Vasari. Remember, we haven't mentioned him a lot because Vasari doesn't have a lot to bring into discussions of Venetian paintings. He didn't get to Venice. 1568 was a book written by Giorgio Vasari. Did we talk about any of this stuff? Not the first, but in the early portrait. He took him through the people of the college. And he took it upon himself to do first, I think one's 1550, I think. And the definitive edited version. Vasari took about it to write a great history of Renaissance art. And he did it biographically, which to this day doesn't affect how we teach it, if you notice that it doesn't part. It affects the Vasari model. Right? And so he did chronologically, starting with like Giotto, Duccio, Louis, around 1200. Yes, he went back when he started tracing the biographies of the artists. And what he had in 1568 was a lot of stuff still where it was originally tended to have gone. And not destroyed by this out here the war, right? And still in the church and so forth, right? So they paid bills, right? So it's a great source for knowing which paintings were where and when we saw them. But Vasari was born, bred, died, worked, everything. Florence. Okay? Now, Italy is small, but Florence, that was his baby. And he's pretty dependent on Florence. Except when he fabricates stories which he can't review about the life. But when it comes to the works of art, where they were, what he saw, right? I saw this here, I saw this here, this one here. And some of the attributions are a little goofy, right? And sometimes the biographical details are way off, especially for people he didn't know. But it still is an amazing book, right? The lives of the others. So he fits it one by one by one. And it's kind of intended, it's a propaganda. It leads to Italy. Everything leads to Italy. That's like you're walking up and you've made it, you move on it, because that was his teaching. Okay? Vasari is also a painter. He has a wonderful Vasari effect. Really. Okay? Because he was in Florence, his details on Venetian pictures are sketchy. He did it a couple times. But he's very much a patriot to him. Right? And so he has, his is a good biography, right? So when he did something in Florence, for example, if you even go back early, Duccio was in Siena, nothing on Duccio, right? It's just zero in the way that a little bit here and there. Right? But the Venetians are not as strong a section as anybody that works in Florence. It's Rocco section. The Michelangelo section is like a book, right? The Rocco section is like a book. And the Titian is like a quarter. Giorgione. He saw this painting. Vasari describes this picture. And he said, I saw it in the family collection of Giovanni Borghini. Right? So it was still in the family collection in 1560 between Vasari and stuff. And he describes it. Right? Which is kind of cool, really, if you think about this work that was written in the 1560s. Has some description of the picture that we have in the actually have. He also describes Giorgione's adoration of the shepherd. And he gets this great story about how somebody wanted to buy, after Giorgione died, wanted to buy one of his works as a necklace. And the other version of our adoration of the shepherd is more obviously said as necklace. We think that's the piece. And they even said, wanted to buy it from him, it was unfinished. And there's this unfinished version of it in Vienna. Vienna Hospital. Okay? So he describes this picture. So that helps us to identify it as being Borgherini the third, but it means to know who the tutor is, right? However, people have gone back into the biography of Borghi and tried to prove who the tutor is. I saw a picture of a medal of the guy I think it is. Maybe, but I didn't want to bug you with it. Right? I didn't want to think, okay, that's what I should be memorizing for the trial. Right? But we do know who he is, right? And we do know that this is obviously one of these wonderful images of him being tutored. Now, there's some suggestion that he's an astrologer, simply because it seems as if the point of the instruction, or an astronomer, I guess is better than astrologer, the point of the instruction is the heavens, right? The firmament. And that's altogether possible, but we can also look at the armillary sphere as being more broadly symbolic of the universe of knowledge, right? That he's learning all things, yeah? Now, somewhere in my notes, where is it? I'm trying to find what the inscription says. There it is. Valet ingenium nisi facta valebunt. Talent has no value without accomplishment. I love that. That's a great motto to have. Doesn't matter how freaking talented you are. If you don't do something with it, it's not worth a thing. Right? Talent is without value, or it has no value without accomplishment. You got to do something. And you think about there's another parable, right, about the talents that people have been given. You got to do something with it in order to be great. So that's what's on there. And obviously, you'll notice that the inscription is meant to be read by you, the viewer, not meant to be inscribed on the entirety of that banner, because there are no missing words, right? And so we can see everything we need to see in order to read it. We'll end with this. Little Borgherini, what is he carrying in his hand? As we go back to my idea that this is not necessarily astrology, but rather the universe of knowledge. Isn't that a beautifully drawn three-dimensional object, by the way? Just beautifully rendered three-dimensional object, right? A great, go get your pencils and go down there and draw that object, because he's got it down, right? He's holding in his hands. Can you see this guy? He's got paintbrushes, right? Right? Here's a flute, and that metal thing. It's a compass, right? It's a spreading compass, right? Isn't a protractor a half circle? Right? So it's that metal. And we use them for drawing circles, but they use them for measurement, right? It was the idea if you lock a measurement in. Sorry? Pointers sometimes also and compasses as well, right? Sorry? With the pencil the other one to draw with, right? The idea with the pointing tool is, again, about measurement. So we can link that to the armillary sphere as well. But also this idea of music, art, measurement, science, if you will, as, again, the universe of knowledge, right? And to be a good humanist, to be a good scholar, right? You guys don't need to know this because you're not going to Strayer or something, right? It's what's this being university in a prep school? Why do we call it university, right? You're going to get it all. You have a liberal arts core that makes you do everything, right? He's getting a good education from the self. So even though he's got the armillary sphere and he's in the act of teaching, we shouldn't think of him as only the astrologer, right? He's the learned mentor. And there, even look at it, give a better detail, right? One last thing I wanted to mention about this in a little bit is that the things he's got in his hand are the same things that the Cupid had in the Lotto allegory that we started off with. So that's what I interpret, right? So there we've got flute, we've got spreader tool, we've got music, right? You don't have paintbrushes. Yeah, we still have a similar parallel with this idea of what does one need to be virtuous, right? And so if you think about the picture and about the education of Giovanni Borgherini, it's not just about knowledge. In fact, you get on my soapbox about why I'm here and why you should be here, right? It's not just about the knowledge. You're becoming a better person, right? You're developing virtue. Yeah, if you're learning, you are. Whether you like it or not, you are. You're learning. Yeah, how do you don't learn it and then you become a don't learn it and you're just
every Friday night is at the frat party, you go to that corner. And instead of these like little Giovanni Morgini, but I can't really use that expression. You know, they just play some music or go major things, right? I love to play that on this shit. I kept the time and play. Sorry, this is a really good place to stop. So on Tuesday, we'll look at some more portraits and kind of wrap this stuff up and look at some of the other Titians from the mid-period. And then on Friday next, we'll plan on going to the museum to look at Titian's portraits in the museum, up close in person. Right? So, good. Sorry for keeping you late, and I'll be getting you lots of emails this weekend about this and the other thing. They're in my office. Come to my office and get your interns.